This is Limelight America. Here's your host, Michael Drew Shaw.
Thank you, Lynette, and welcome to Limelight America, where we present one-on-one personal conversations with interesting people from all walks of life. These up-close encounters with people of the fascinating and inspiring kind include business, entertainment, sports, and artistic entrepreneurs, scholars, role models, and philanthropists who impact the quality of life for us all. For those first-time listeners, let me give you our resume. Limelight America is compiled from a wide range of libraries, historical collections, and legacy websites. We thank the dedicated individuals responsible for preserving the rich history we share with our listeners. We try to garnish our show, make each one a listening experience with mini features, such as The Dream Warriors. These are original mini-biographies about American business pioneers that illustrate the imagination and the perseverance it takes to achieve an entrepreneurial goal. And in partnership with EntrepreneurPress.com, we present Radicals and Visionaries periodically. This series is based on the work of author Thaddeus Warrow, and it highlights those real people, those entrepreneurs who revolutionized the 20th century. Our interviews feature role models, entrepreneurs, scholars, and philanthropists from business, entertainment, sports, and the arts. And some of them are outrageously funny, and always interesting. Such is the case with our guest today, George Parker, a longtime advertising industry creative consultant. George takes Vance Packard's late 1950s bestseller, a book called The Hidden Persuaders, and drags it kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Everything you thought you knew about the snake oil salesman on Madison Avenue is lovingly eviscerated and then reassembled in a brand new book called The Ubiquitous Persuaders. George is our guest today. It's going to be quite a ride. I promise you'll enjoy it. So, that and a lot more today on Limelight America. Stay with us. The first radio commercial is credited to WEAF in New York. That was on August 28, 1922. The commercial was for the Queensboro Real Estate Corporation. The 10-minute live commercial was voiced by H.M. Blackwell, who was a representative of Queensboro. In radio's golden age, advertisers often sponsored entire programs or program segments, typically airing their commercials within the program. If you want to do some reminiscing, I've got a place for you. It's a website called oldtimeradiofans.com. oldtimeradiofans.com.
You're listening to Limelight America.
Our very special guest today on Limelight America is George Parker, who is a lot of things. Among those things, an author and certainly an advertising guru. And I'm happy to say that George is a friend of mine. Well, first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here. I hope and think I'm probably going to enjoy it.
We'll find out. Give us some geographical connection, George. Where are you talking to us from today?
I'm actually talking to you from Boise, Idaho, and which I moved here 12 years ago from New York, even though I still do most of my business out of New York and some out of the West Coast.
What is it that made you say, hey, I want to be in advertising, I'm going to America?
Actually, when I first went to college, I was intending to do a degree in science. I was taking a BSc in chemistry, and I'd only been on it for a couple of months, and I used to be a big climber, and I had a big fall and broke my leg in about 50 places and so on. I had to be in hospital for 10 days. The window that I looked out of in the hospital was next to the art school, and there were all these really good looking women going in and out, and I thought, screw chemistry, I'm going to be an artist. So that was my big career decision. It was as simple as that. I managed to get an interview with David Ogilvy, the famous British man of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a big guy. He was a very famous guy even in those days. And so I was quite honored to get the interview. And he gave me like 20 minutes of his time, and he was really nice and gracious. And at the end of it, I said, tell me, Mr. Ogilvy, I said, I'm like fresh off the boat, and I know nothing about American business and so on. So if somebody should offer me a job, I have no idea how much salary to ask for. He said, dear boy, I never discuss money. I employ people who discuss money. You'll have to talk to them. And I thought, wow, bloody hell, that's good. That's like talking to the Queen, because she never carries money or anything like that. So, but he was really nice. Didn't give me a job, lousy bugger. But I did manage to get a job in a studio, and I was here for 6 months. So I went to the creative director, and I said, I want to be a writer. And he said, well, you can't. You've been hired as an art director, and in those days you were like pigeonholed. That was it. You were hired as an art director, you'll work as an art director, you'll die as an art director. And that was in the 60s, again, mid to late 60s. And that was the, if any of the listeners have seen, what's the program, Mad Men, which is all about the advertising business in the 60s, the early 60s, and all they do is like drink, smoke, and have sex, which is the way it was. It was great. And in between, we did a few ads, I was speaking at a conference a year and a half ago in New York, and at the end of it, there was a question and answer session, and somebody said to me, you've been in the business a long time, so you must have seen many, many changes. And I stopped for a minute, and I thought, and I said, no, actually, I've only seen 2 major changes. There's been a lot of minor changes, obviously, but only 2 major changes. One is the advent of new media, and the other is what I call the conglomerization of the ad biz. By that, I mean that all the agencies, all the major agencies, or BDAs as I call them, which is big dumb agencies, now belong to one of 4 major holding companies. And the problem is, all the holding companies and virtually all the agencies that are members of these, that are owned by these holding companies, are all publicly traded. So consequently, they have to make the numbers every quarter. So in essence, it's not about doing good work or good or effective work. It's about making the numbers. It's like, as I say, the business is run by bean counters. The Ubiquitous Persuaders is a kind of 50-year update of what was a very famous book that was published in 1957 called The Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard. And that was a book basically about how the advertising business is like manipulating the minds of the American consumer. And it was full of stories about how you would be in a cinema watching a movie and a slide would pop on for like 1/10 of a second. So a subliminal message would say, buy popcorn. And everybody would charge out of the cinema and buy popcorn. It never happened. It was just, one of these myths that grew. Also, another one was that, all the booze ads, when you looked at the pictures of the liquor in a glass on ice cubes, if you looked very closely at the ice cubes, you could see naked women, which was bullshit because they spent hours looking for the naked women and never found one, But the interesting fact about that period, which is, what Mad Men is based on, is that you could reach 98% of the American public through the use of 3 TV channels, because there were only 3, ABC, NBC, and CBS. Today, with the advent of new media, there are literally thousands and thousands of ways that you can communicate with your potential audience. Now, advertising is everywhere. It's actually less and less effective, because although people in advertising and media would have you believe you have all these many choices now to reach the consumer, my point is, but the consumer also has many, many more choices to avoid you.
If I go to the supermarket to buy eggs or butter, and I get to the showcase where those products are, and there on the floor in front of the showcase is an ad. Isn't that a really good case of I gotcha? I mean, that's unavoidable.
Well, yeah, but I tell you what's even funnier. Well, if you go in the supermarket now, it depends which supermarket, but after you've bought everything and you're at the checkout, the conveyor belt that you put all your stuff on has ads on it. Well, isn't that a bit late? You've already bought everything. What are you going to do? Leave it and rush back in the store? I mean, sometimes there's little logic. But also, yeah, you stood in front of the egg case, right, and you're looking at this ad on your feed, and it's going to say, you know, buy Smith's eggs or whatever it happens to be. And now, and this is actually happening, you go home and you open up the egg box. The eggs now have ads on them. Depends on the supermarket and depends on the company, but no, there's ads everywhere. The very worst example is, of course, whenever you go to the doctor's or any medical establishment. I have a whole chapter on that. The doctor's office now is like a bloody carnival stall. There's like logos on everything.
We're with George Parker, author of The Ubiquitous Persuaders. This is Limelight America. Hang on, we'll be back. The Bissells were not warriors. They were just two folks running a crockery shop in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Mel Bissell was allergic to straw, which was a problem since crockery was shipped in straw. So he designed a lightweight sweeper to pick up excess dust around the store. Mel's invention worked so well that customers tried to buy it. The Bissells eventually got out of crockery and into sweepers. Anna supervised production. Mel handled sales. He used the simple technique of throwing a handful of dirt on the customer's floor and then dramatically whisking it away with his revolutionary new Bissell sweeper. And as you can imagine, Mel used to endure a lot of jokes about business picking up. And welcome back to Limelight America, a great conversation going in progress, if you've just joined us, with George Parker, our advertising expert, our author. What I'd like to share with the listeners are some of the recognizable ad campaigns that you were responsible for, unforgettable commercials. Can we talk about that?
Sure. I mean, the one that, I guess the most unforgettable one, which for the first 10 years I was highly ashamed of, but it's now become a kind of legend and icon, is I was a member of the original team. Wasn't a single person ever, but the original team that created Mr. Whipple for Charmin, Charmin bathroom tissues. And of course it was Procter & Gamble, still is, and it's still probably one of their biggest single money-making products, and it's been around for years. But the interesting thing about Mr. Whipple, the same actor played that role for, I think it was like 27 years, which is a record in the ad business. There have been other characters like, Josephine the Plumber and Mr. Clean and so on. Jack Willem played Mr. Whipple for like 27 years without a break. And it was funny because like he would open supermarkets for like $50,000 or something, and cut the cord with a big giant pair of cardboard scissors and then get mobbed by little old ladies who wanted to squeeze his Charmin. Don't forget, also in those days, advertising was actually a license to print money, because way back in those days, until about 20 years ago, agencies were paid on what was known as the 15% commission. In other words, like, if a client spent $100 million through an agency, or the agency bought $100 million worth of media, the client would pay that, and the media would kick back $15 million.
Which was always the argument to the client, that to have an agency doesn't cost you anymore.
That's right. But on the other hand, if you think about it, it was a kickback, which is, in strictly speaking terms, illegal. But it went on for years and years and years. And the great thing was, as you were saying, Michael, that, see, if you created a campaign, if you created, like a Mr. Whipple campaign, and maybe there were like 6 ads in a year, and every time they ran, the money rolled in. I mean, it was like a printing machine, at the U.S. Mint. And as you say, the perception of the clients originally was this didn't cost them anything. But then, as it became easier for clients to buy media direct and get the commissions rebated direct to them, then the system started to fall apart, and then agencies started to work on fees, which were based loosely on the 15% commission, but then they'd get negotiated down to the point where today there are agencies working on major pieces of business who are working on a fee which is basically, 1 or 2% of the spend. I mean, it's crazy. It's become a business that, like, nobody in their right mind would run based on the return commensurate with the investment that's going on. I'm talking about the agency. I'm not talking about the client. So that was my most infamous campaign. As I say, for the first 10 years, I was too ashamed to admit it. But then it's kind of like a scarlet letter, It's like having Mr. Whipple branded on your forehead. And I'm allowed to make jokes about it now. But some of the others that I'm more proud of, particularly going back to the 60s. I mean, if you go to my website, not my blog, but my website, which is parkerads.com, I have a section on there which I call classics, and these are campaigns that I did in the 60s. One is for Hasselblad cameras, another one is for the Irish Tourist Board, and a very famous one called L'Etoile, which was a French restaurant on 5th and 57th, I think it was. And the great thing about working on that account was that we took the fee in trade, so we could go and eat and drink ourselves stupid at all these famous restaurants, just sign the shit. And I remember one night I was with my wife when we were in L'Etoile, the French one, and the door opened and in walked Salvador Dali, wearing a top hat and a cape and a silver top walking stick, and he had 2 ocelot, like miniature jaguars on a leash, and he sat down at the table and they were all over him because he had there regularly. And the 2 ocelots had their own little table at the side. The good old days. And after being in America through the 60s and the early 70s, we moved back to England for 10 years because we'd had 2 kids by then. We wanted them to go to school in England. Not that there's anything wrong with the American school system, but we wanted them to grow up to be gentlemen like me, So I was working in England, and I was running BBD&O's international business, European and international business-to-business stuff. So I was going all over Europe and did some quite famous stuff there, and also including the Economist campaign. Then came back in the 80s, but living not in New York this time, but in California, and I was involved in a lot of technology advertising for companies like Apple, Intel, IBM, and so on. But I'm concentrating more on writing the books, because I've had 2 published now, and I'm just starting on a 3rd. I mean, which is a ball buster. Doing a book is like just incredibly hard work. You go in, you think, oh yeah, anybody could write a book, but it's a real chore. But there's a great sense of accomplishment when you've finished it, and the new one's doing pretty well, so pleased about that. But you don't get rich writing books, not business books. If you're John Grisham, or God willing, if you get your book on Oprah, then the vault doors open. But those are very few and far between. It's interesting, the book business, the publishing business, like the music business, like the film business, is like going through really hard times and is changing radically. One of the most famous campaigns I did was like back in the dot-com boom, and it's on my website again, parkerads.com, in the TV section. And I did all the advertising for Quest, which was one of the major telecommunications companies at the time. It still is. I did all the brand stuff, and they were the leaders in fiber optic networking at the time. And I did a campaign that's, and the first one in it is like, it's a traveling salesman, and he goes in a motel somewhere in the middle of the desert, and the girl's behind the desk, and he says, you got a room? And she says, yeah, $59 or whatever. And he says, got any food? And she says, there's a vending machine in the corridor. He says, what about entertainment? And she says, we have every movie ever made in every country, in every language, and it's available anytime, day and night. He says, how's that possible? And then the logo pops up, and it's Quest, Ride the Light. And then another one is the same guy. I used him. He's a great character actor. He was in The Shawshank Redemption and other things. He goes in a diner, and he wants something to drink and eat, and he wants, music. And the jukebox in the diner, in this little pokey diner, has every piece of music ever recorded in every version by every conductor or whatever ever done, you know. And then another one is like a girl goes into a little corner newspaper kiosk, and this guy has every book ever published in every edition in every language, and it's available anytime you want it. So the whole point was, this is what, and John Metcalfe, who's a famous technology guy, he's the guy that invented Ethernet networking, which is the foundation of all local area networks, and he said this was the best description of what broadband technology could do. And this was like 7 or 8 years ago, so it was like actually ahead of its time, that you can have, through the wonders of the internet and broadband technology, books, music, videos. I mean, it's all on demand now. I mean, this is the way it's going. So you know, bookstores will disappear. I mean, there'll still be like specialist ones like history or geography or theatrical arts or something like that. But the big mass bookstores will go, just like the big mass record stores are going. You know, I mean, like they just, when was it, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, Virgin Records, Virgin Music, which in Times Square just closed down. It was the biggest music store in the universe, and they just closed it down because they couldn't afford to keep it open anymore and carry all that inventory. It's all online, and if it isn't now, it certainly will be within the next 5 years. So, and this is what's going to happen to cinemas, to you know, apart from people wanting to go out and make an occasion of it. It's like everything's available and it's all downloadable, and that's what's going to happen.
And now a word from our sponsors.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee. Performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA and see it in your Chevrolet.
We're talking with Thaddeus Warrow, the author of Radicals and Visionaries. I have to believe you have a couple of favorites.
You know, growing up seeing I Love Lucy, I always considered Lucy to be a brilliant comedian and Desi just her straight man. Desi was not only an excellent businessman, but he was quite an innovator.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Winters, and I want to say, okay, are you ready? You have a level here and you're all set.
When did you really first come to the realization that you were a star?
Well, not to play a game of semantics with you, I still don't consider myself a, quote, star.
All right, you build companies to sell them. Now, I started out with Chongqing Chinese Foods in 1944, and I sold to R.J. Reynolds Tobacco for $63 million in '67. I have 7 banks, because I had to put the money somewhere.
Radio's most talked about talk show, Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw.
We're back with George Parker. Where do you see the advertising industry going from this point forward?
In my my new book, The Ubiquitous Persuaders, which I shall now plug mercilessly, the final chapter, which is titled My, But Those Meteors Are Pretty, and I'll just read you the first couple of lines because it kind of sums it up. Just as millions of years ago the dinosaurs gazed in awe at the meteors rushing towards them, today's big dumb agencies talk up a storm about new opportunities yet blithely ignore new dangers. All are convinced they can reinvent themselves. So what kind of advertising can we expect when celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Ubiquitous Persuaders? Will the practitioners of the world's second oldest art have steered the Exxon Valdez of Madison Avenue away from the rocks of irrelevancy? There's an old saw that's been around in the ad business for years, which is 50% of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. Unfortunately, I don't know which 50%. And I always say, well, that's not true, because it's not 50% that's wasted, it's 90%. They all talk about branding, because branding is something that you can't put your finger on. They never talk about sales, talk about branding. You know, we increase brand awareness, we increase brand favorability. They never say we increase sales by 24.68%.
The author is George Parker. The book is The Ubiquitous Persuaders. Where do they buy it, George?
On Amazon. If you go on Amazon and just type in my name, George Parker, the 2 books will come up, but The Ubiquitous Persuaders, which I know is a bit of a mouthful, will pop up, and that's the one that I think you would enjoy reading.
You're one of the few guys that looks like you sound. You look like Sean Connery.
That's what my granddaughter says, yeah. I wish. I wish I had his money.
Thank you for your time, George.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was great.
He's the hero of hungry college students and couch potatoes everywhere. The man who made getting a fresh, hot pizza as easy as picking up the telephone. By pioneering the delivery-only pizza chain, Tom Monahan turned a single, floundering pizza parlor into the nation's second-largest pizza chain. Along the way, he amassed a fortune estimated to top $1 billion. Not bad for a poor kid from Ann Arbor, Michigan, who graduated last in his high school class, was kicked out of seminary school, and enrolled in college 6 times without getting past the status of freshman. Tom Monahan's early life reads something like a Charles Dickens novel. When he was only 4, his father died, on Christmas Eve, no less. His mother felt incapable of caring for her 2 sons while she attended nursing school, so Monahan spent most of his youth in orphanages and foster homes. When he was a freshman in high school, he decided he wanted to be a priest. But the seminary's strict discipline proved too much for the rambunctious youth to handle, and he was expelled less than a year later for such heinous transgressions as pillow fighting and talking in the chapel. Returning to public school, Monahan graduated 44th in a class of 44. The caption under his photo in the 1955 class yearbook read, "The harder I try to be good, the worse I get. But I may do something sensational yet." Monahan dreamed of studying architecture at the University of Michigan, but his poor grades coupled with a lack of money ruled that out. He enlisted in the Marine Corps, and by the end of his 3-year tour, he had saved $2,000 for tuition. But he invested the money in a get-rich-quick scheme with an unscrupulous oil man. Of course, he never saw the money or the oil man again. With only $15 in his pocket, Monahan hitchhiked from San Diego back to Ann Arbor. In 1960, Monahan's luck finally began to change when he and his brother, Jim, borrowed $900 and bought a failing pizza store in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Monahan threw himself into the business, putting in upwards of 100 hours per week. 8 months into the venture, his brother grew tired of the grind and traded his half of the business for Monahan's Volkswagen Beetle. It was a setback, but I took it in stride and I was optimistic, Monahan writes in his autobiography, Pizza Tiger. I made the decision to commit myself heart and soul to being a pizza man. My purpose was clear, and the knowledge that the future success or failure of the business rested on my shoulders alone was welcome. To celebrate the opening of his 1,000th franchise in 1983, Monahan realized a lifelong dream by purchasing the Detroit Tigers baseball club for $35 million. The very next year, the Tigers won the World Series. Domino's remarkable growth continued throughout the second half of the 1980s, and by 1989, the company boasted almost 5,000 stores in the U.S. and nearly 260 in other countries. That same year, Monahan shocked the business world by giving up the presidency of Domino's to devote more time to Catholic charities. He remained chairman and CEO until 1998, when he once again surprised the industry by announcing his retirement and selling his 93% stake in Domino's to the Boston-based investment firm Bain Capital for an estimated $1 billion. As for Domino's, it's doing just fine without its founder. In 2005, it boasted more than 7,100 stores in over 60 countries, and its sales totaled more than $4 billion. It was the second largest pizza chain in the United States when it went public in 2004. In other words, it's selling a lot of pizzas. And looking back, in the early days of Domino's Pizza Inc., Tom Monahan not only managed the store, he delivered his product too. One evening in 1962, he delivered a pizza to a dormitory at Central Michigan University, where switchboard operator Marge Zybeck caught his eye. 6 months later, Marge took Tom for better, for worse, and for all the pizza she could eat.
Limelight America is produced by the LA Radio Network.